Zach, welcome to the show.
Marcus, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you. So let's start by giving a quick introduction about your company, Yembo.ai, and a little background about yourself.
Sure. So I am the CTO and co-founder, one of two founders at Yembo. We were started in 2016, just sort of like ancient history in the AI space. And we wanted to solve a problem using computer vision technology in an area that nobody else was looking at. So if you remember back to 2016, if you were to drop yourself into Silicon Valley, a lot of companies were focusing on drones or self-driving cars. And we've built this technology to streamline property insurance and relocation quotes. And I can talk a bit about how we kind of ended up there, but in a nutshell, this process is really logistically complicated. If you're relocating from one city to another, in order to accurately assess what you have, how much equipment is needed, the labor, all those sorts of things, somebody who is a trained expert needs to come into the home, identify everything that's there. It's not just looking at the items that are physically there, but also identifying the materials that you would need. So for instance, if I'm moving these book cartons, what size do you need? If you pick a really big carton, it could be too heavy to lift, all those kinds of things. So a trained expert can walk around in a typical home in about an hour or so. And that process is just really long and complicated. So we've built computer vision technology that allows these companies to do the surveying remotely. And because there's computer vision that's identifying the objects, that's counting the packing materials, this process isn't taking an hour or an hour and a half. It's taking about 20 minutes or so. So we're seeing efficiency gains in terms of being able to have a faster, more focused conversation. We're seeing quality improvements because we're actually capturing the images of the items being moved so the crews can be more prepared on move day. And overall, it's sort of like a typical AI value proposition that we're able to provide an output that is just infeasible if you didn't have AI. Nobody has the time to go and annotate every single individual item that you own, but if you're using computer vision, then you can do it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting business model, how it's typically something that you wouldn't think is technically heavy, and you guys have been able to integrate computer vision technology into that. So at this point, I know you guys have been in business since 2016. What's the current state of the business in terms of revenue numbers approximately and the number of employees?
Sure. So we are about 70 people across the globe, about 40 of that here in the States, the other 30 international. We are live in about 20 different countries right now with our moving product. We have another product, the insurance product, which is newer and it's more regulated. So there we're only live in the US right now. Um, and every day we're processing about 300-ish hours of video in those 20, 30-second kind of zips around a room. We also have a video chat product. So some of our surveys are a live video chat where the AI joins. But basically, the sun never sets on Yembo surveys. They are live all over the world.
That's awesome. And Yembo was started back in 2016 before AI really became mainstream. How did you first identify that AI could be applied to moving companies? And what made you, at that early stage, how did you identify that this technology would be something that you'd want to invest a significant amount of time in your future to?
So I think there's one thing that we did right. There are a lot of things we did wrong that we course corrected on later. But I think one thing that we did right is we started with the problem and then went to solve that problem. Where I see a lot of other prospective founders or friends who want to use AI, they kind of chase a headline and there's this tendency and a temptation to do something just because everybody else is doing it. And I don't really see those kinds of initiatives lasting very long. They usually, the luster kind of wears off, reality sets in, and whatever criteria were established for success doesn't get hit. But I think one of the main things that we did was, I'm an engineer by training, my co-founder's an engineer by training, and I was aware of the fundamental capabilities of the technology at that point in time. So if you rewind the clock back to 2015, there's a popular benchmark. It's in a competition forum called ImageNet. And if you're not familiar with ImageNet, you can think of it like a 1,000-way multiple choice test. So if I were to show you a photograph and ask you, hey, Marcus, what's in this photo? As a human, it's trivially easy for you to do that. But for an AI to look at that and say, hey, this is a picture of a baseball stadium or a picture of a man riding a horse in front of a barn. It's much more complicated for an AI to do it. And what happened in 2015 was Microsoft submitted a submission to this competition, and they were able to cross the threshold of 95% accuracy. And that 95% number is significant because humans had been benchmarked at 95%. So if you were to show a college-educated human these photos, that they would make mistakes about 5% of the time. So for the first time, as far as I'm aware in human history, computers had become better than people at recognizing objects and images, but almost nobody knew about it. And the people who did know about it were making drones and self-driving cars. And what I wanted to do and what my co-founder wanted to do was find an industry that can benefit from this technology, like using that fundamental insight, and not go and chase a super crowded market where there's a million other competitors and you're competing with Google and Uber and all these other huge incumbents, but basically find an industry where you can be a magician, where you can come in and say, you may not know this is possible, but here's the state of the art today. And by knowing that core capability, then we were surveying different use cases and finding, where is this a problem? And what we learned about the moving sector was everybody has a hard time surveying. If you go to the Better Business Bureau and you look at complaints against moving companies, big companies, medium companies, small companies, local movers, international movers, across the board, everybody has, if you like just look at the 1 and the 2-star ratings, it's very commonly complained about, hey, my estimate was off. They told me it would be $2,000 and then things added up and they ended up charging me 4 or 5. And the more we learned about the space, the more we realized, A, it wasn't for lack of trying. It's just really logistically complicated. If you have a piano in your home, there's special equipment you need to bring to tie the hammers, otherwise they break. So if you like forget to mention you have a piano, someone shows up on move day, you just need to decide now, what am I going to do? And those are the kinds of complexities that can come up. We've had some customers mention that counting the number of rolls of tape is important for profitability and things like that, that if you get that wrong, that can be the difference in a profitable and unprofitable job. So it's just really complicated. And the benefit of AI is that it doesn't have good days and bad days. It's consistent, and you can set your rules around how you want this thing to behave. In the US, we have a book carton. They're usually about 1.5 cubic feet, and you would pack these books in a book carton. But in Canada, they don't do that. They do 2 cubic foot cartons. So like these are like small differences, but you can customize the AI and tell it how you want it to perform. And that way, if you scan the same bookshelf, it doesn't matter if you're 5 different people, you won't get 5 different answers. And that was the real value prop of the AI. But it was basically starting with that understanding of what can the technology fundamentally do? And then we found a problem where that solution addresses a real business need. And that was one thing we've been pretty fanatically obsessed with, is we don't want to build technology for technology's sake.
Yeah.
We don't want to just add AI because AI is there. That we joke that, hey, we're Yembo.ai because you can buy an AI domain. But if I could be Yembo.workflow, I would change my brand name overnight, because that's really what we care about, is what is that workflow the customers are doing and how do we help them be more efficient at it, be more accurate at it, be more competitive, where they can win more jobs, where maybe before they'd have to sit in traffic for 2 hours to go get to a site. But what happens if you could do that remotely? But that's really where like the magic sits, is understanding the deployment and the workflow, and how do you get your technology embedded in that, because that's how you provide value to the end user.
I find that interesting because a lot of times founders will see a problem, maybe it's in their job where they're currently working and there's a manual process, and then they identify the problem and then they find technology to go and solve that. What I find it interesting in your case is where you were exposed to this technology very early on, you understood the capabilities of it, and then you guys were able to identify a niche or a problem where this technology could come and solve it. So you and your co-founder Sid are engineers by trade. Did you guys go out and develop the AI yourself for that initial product, or did you guys work with PhD machine learning engineers to develop your initial product?
Sure. So there's the story then and the story now. In the early days, 2 guys in a garage sitting on beanbag chairs. We did everything ourselves. I mean, we were both engineers. We had the background. We were training our own models, collecting our own data.
Yeah.
But the first version of the product that we launched, and I think this is relevant for anybody in your audience who may be thinking about starting an AI company, it actually had no AI at all. It goes back to that idea of the Yembo.workflow, is we wanted to validate that workflow would work. There were concerns that we needed to address along the lines of, if I send somebody a link, will they be willing to click it? If I capture the video, is it sufficient for a trained human who knows how to do this if they were to go on site? Can they give an accurate quote? But if there are whatever reason why they're not able to do that, then you're kind of wasting your time building AI to do something that the information is just not there. So the very first version, we learned pretty early on that this drive time here in the States is a big problem. I live in Southern California, and if I go at the wrong time of day, it can take me an hour to go 5 miles down the road. So we found that saving somebody the drive was valuable. So we started off, we gave the product away completely for free to these local movers. And we picked local movers because they start and they end in your town. So you could learn the process really well. You can go hang out in their office. You can, one of them even gave us a polo. I was in training and basically attended and actually got to see the survey, got to see the move, got to see the whole thing end to end. Also helped pick up some boxes and things like that too, but learned about the whole process. And then we were able to deploy this workflow that digitized a manual process. And then once that was working, then the AI basically shrunk the time that it took to work through one of these from 60 minutes to 30 minutes to 25 minutes to 22 minutes, and then kind of got down to where it is today. So I think at the end of the day, understanding that workflow of where you're embedding yourself into, I would say was more important than the AI itself in those early days, because it made sure that we were pointing the ship in the right direction. And then when we started training the models, collecting the data, it just kind of accelerated everything because we already had a distribution channel to put that AI in. And it's really tempting as an engineer specifically to want to jump right to the AI. That's the cool part. That's the shiny part. That's what everybody's talking about. But I believe if we had done that, we probably would have built AI for the wrong thing, that it wouldn't have addressed the actual customer need, because I had never worked at a moving company before. So if you ask me what I think movers need, you kind of have to check your pride at the door, walk in with humility, and understand I don't really know what I don't know here. So let me talk to some people who actually run into these problems, figure out what works for them, and then start building a solution once you understand what's really going on.
So it seems like, yeah, you guys understood with the technology, you kind of had an end goal or an end idea of what the technology could lead to. And that is AI can process items in a room, or computer vision technology can process items in a room, and you can write logic and code around that to identify the size, weight, etc., to help moving companies. But instead of starting to build that solution right away, you guys took incremental steps to verify that this was indeed the right path to arrive at eventually building this AI solution, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I think the lesson there is, if you go to like a startup group in a college dormitory, and I've done some lectures and things like that, there seems to be this myth that there's like a good idea and a bad idea when it comes to a startup, where if you're pitching ideas and we're brainstorming, I'm going to go and Google everything you're saying. And if I don't find anything, then that means we found something new. And if I do find something, it's a bad idea. But I think that's a bit simplistic. And the way that I see the startup landscape, and plenty of directions you can go in, especially with AI, it's kind of applicable everywhere. I think of it like the mobile phone or the personal computer, where it's like a horizontal enabler platform. And when you're thinking about building a startup, it's not just, is this a novel idea, but it's, is it a valuable idea? And is it right for the founding team? So I think the part that people can sometimes overlook is the right startup idea for you could be totally different than the right startup idea for me. So where I was at that point in time, I was relatively young. I was in my mid-20s. I had a corporate job for about 5 years. I had the ability to do some consulting work, but I wasn't like Elon Musk level wealthy, so I couldn't go and have like a 10-year time horizon. So like you put all the constraints and parameters together, and the decision that my co-founder and I made was, we'd like to build technology that is like 2 to 5 years ahead of its time. Where if I need like 20 years to get to market, then it's like the time horizon just kind of doesn't work for me. And I don't want to make just another SaaS app that I can like launch an MVP in 3 months, even though there's not really anything differentiated there. So we actually had like a pretty involved conversation around what those parameters were. And I think that was a really helpful exercise to go through, because it aligned the realities that I was living in as a founder with the expectations of what the product was going to need to be able to do. And I believe we were able to hit that, where we built this technology. Initially, it ended up taking about 2 years after that initial launch with no AI before the AI was able to be sort of like an integral part of that workflow. And now we don't offer the product without the AI anymore, because we kind of bootstrapped everything that we need. We got it up and running, and it works. It has value. So why would you turn it off? But I think it was a really helpful lesson to kind of go back and look at what is the right idea for me, given where I am, the time horizon that I have, and the kind of company that I want to build.
I like that because, yeah, everyone's situation is different. And it's hard to give blanket advice without taking into account the parameters of the person who's receiving that advice. So, how were you guys able to identify, or what was the thought process and exercise you and your co founder took into account to identify that indeed this technology had a 2 to 5 year, you guys were 2 to 5 years ahead of where this technology could be? Because, for example, we could look at things such as crypto or AI, and there's lots of ideas floating around on how it's going to impact society. And for example, a lot of times with crypto, it's like this can replace cash in a lot of
Yeah.
cases. And it seems like we're a long way from that if it ever does happen, as there's a million parameters that go into something like that. So, how were you guys able to identify that this technology was indeed something that in 2 to 5 years you will have a successful business built around it?
I would say assume nothing and test along the way. So the
Okay.
difference between what we were building with AI and crypto is, I would argue crypto is not a technology problem. It's an adoption problem. It's a people problem.
Mhm.
That the technology is there. There are white papers. You can download the code. It's a solve problem, essentially. And the reason that it's not used in more places is more of a distribution challenge than an engineering challenge. And what we were doing with Yembo was, we wanted to make sure that it was feasible to create AI workflows that would give you at least as good, ideally better, an output that a human would get there. And that wasn't even understood to be the case. So we had to basically experiment. So we had a running list in our office. This was pre-COVID, before we were remote. So we had a whiteboard, and we had a bunch of hypotheses. We call this the gripe doc. All of the gripes about the product, where assume that it's not going to work well. What are the reasons that it's failing that you're seeing right now? And the idea is not to be a pessimist. The idea is to get ahead of anything that could be systematic. So if you send somebody a link to go do a Yembo and they never click it, doesn't matter if your AI is good or bad. You failed before you even started.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things, where people need to understand the workflow. They need to be motivated to do it. Yeah, we're saving you a 60 to 90-minute in-person visit, but because we prevented that from happening, some people don't see it as a comparison against that. They saw it as a comparison against doing nothing. And they say, oh, I got to spend 10 minutes doing this. And even though it would have been 60 or 90, you're getting complaints because it's not zero. So we basically listed out all of these problems that could come up, and we made sure that we addressed them. And then we got to the point where the AI finally became the bottleneck, where we had the workflow, we were sending the invites out, people were recording the videos, they're coming back in. We had a platform where you could review the videos, build out those visual reports. And I think putting all of that work together was really what ended up being critical for the business to actually succeed, because we were making sure that we were focusing our efforts on things that would actually move the needle. If we had just started with the AI, and just imagine hypothetically, you've got AI that can understand the interior of a home. You can identify furniture, you can identify measurements, like anything that you can imagine you have that. But if you don't have the workflow around it, no one can use it.
Yeah.
So you could have achieved technical nirvana and still be a year away from having any kind of meaningful deployment if you go out of order. So I think that's kind of like starting in the right spot is what I'd recommend doing there, because the signals that you start listening to, the complaints you hear from customers, all of those kinds of things kind of push you in the right direction if you got the plumbing laid first before you go and add the bells and whistles on top.
Mhm. So you and your co-founder are engineers by trade, and you're applying novel technology to a very non-technical job traditionally. And one of the things I've learned in my time as a software developer, I used to work, my first job was in an agency. So I was
Okay.
working as a developer. I was building apps typically for non-technical clients. And I quickly learned that you have to learn how to speak the language of a non-technical client. Especially we're working on software applications, I'm working with developers. But then if I have a client presentation or I have to explain a feature set, etc., I have to understand who I'm talking to and be able to present it in a way that's understandable. Obviously, you're an engineer and you're working with moving companies who I assume were not using a whole bunch of technology in their businesses beforehand. Was there a learning curve for you to explain the benefits of AI and how they can apply it to their business and be able to translate that into a way that your customers can understand?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the secret, I think this is applicable probably in most industries, and it might be a hot take, I don't know, but nobody cares about the AI. People
Yeah.
have jobs that they're required to do. They have yardsticks that they are being measured by. They have certain parameters. If you hit these goals, they get promoted, they get bonuses. If they fail miserably, maybe they get let go. But there's a world that exists that doesn't have anything to do with this AI. So when you come in, it's not really a benefit to just say, hey, I do the same thing, but I use AI. That makes it about me as the technology provider. But to
Yeah.
the customer, you have to learn, what do they care about? And we learned that our customers cared about quality, they cared about efficiency, they care about differentiating their service against less scrupulous players in the market. And if you use the AI as a tool to magnify those customers' qualities that they're interested in, or mitigate a downside risk around, hey, the 1 and 2 star reviews, they come in and they complain about these topics and this tool addresses those things. Now you're making the customer the star of the show, not yourself. And then it's fine to say, hey, we use AI to kind of accelerate it. But I would say AI is sort of like, think of it like baking powder. It's an ingredient that goes into the cake, but you're not going to go shopping around saying, oh, must have baking powder in this baked good. Like you have a particular outcome that you want to go get. Maybe it's a pie, maybe it's a cake.
Yeah.
But like how it's made, don't like blow that up out of proportion. Find somebody who's made a rock star because of your workflow. That's what I'd recommend.
So in your book, you talked about as CTO, you are involved in obviously all the technical aspects of the product, front end, back end infrastructure. And you had a really interesting point where you're talking about delegating tasks to your engineers. So if a bug came up and trusting the engineers to go and fix that instead of going in and fixing it yourself. And then it also transitions throughout your book where you had to kind of understand that the product was getting very complicated
Mm.
and there was things as the CTO where you have your head in a lot of different spaces that it's difficult to be up to date on what's going on exactly in the code base. And I know you guys worked through having a lot of documentation on that sort of on the code base so that somebody could easily ramp up. But concerning the AI technology, you as an engineer, how much do you understand the AI technology that's being built at Yembo? And is that something you're actively working with, maybe writing code with, or is that more delegated to PhD AI engineers?
I would say I know enough about it, but if I were to try to interview on the AI team, I don't think I'd get a job offer. Um, so I have 4 disciplines that report up to me. I have product design, I have software engineering, I have product management, and I have the AI team. So my job is to bring all the right people in the room, make sure we're pointed in the right directions, build out the right partnerships, kind of like steering the ship. So
Mm-hmm.
I do read papers, but I don't think I grasp everything that there is to know about it. I think my job is more connecting the dots and having the right people kind of go really deep on a particular area. So I can participate. We do these paper reviews where engineers will read individual papers and come back and present like the interesting pieces in one. And I'll occasionally drop in and kind of join some of those. And it's good. It keeps me sharp. But I do think that it's valuable to acknowledge that I'm not the best at absolutely everything. I I went into industry right after getting my bachelor's degree, so I'm not going to be able to go toe to toe with someone with a PhD who's focused almost exclusively in one area their entire career.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's important to understand the business context and this application. What problem is it solving? And I feel like that's where I'm capable of having the most value. But it kind of extends across the board everywhere. There are engineers on my team that are better at front end coding. CSS is not my strongest suit. And I feel like I know enough to make everything work. And if I need to roll up my sleeves and build out a feature, I usually can. Um, but I think at the end of the day, having those experts that can go really deep and don't get pulled into a million different directions as a founder does. It's sort of doing a disservice to the team if you put yourself in that helm position. Because if you look at it, in a given day, I have a lot of different responsibilities. So I may spend 10 hours a week on coding something and 10 hours a week doing product management, 10 hours a week
Mhm.
exhibiting or something along those lines. So it's not really intellectually honest to say that I'm going to be a professional in this like 5-10 hours a week where somebody else is spending 40 hours a week just doing that thing. So I feel like as a leader, your responsibility shifts from just getting the thing to work to putting the right systems and processes in place so that people don't need to come to you and have you unblock it. Because a lot of times I found where I do need to come in and unblock, it's more of a communication gap where there's some context that I have because either a customer directly spoke to me or I had an idea, and not communicating that context causes a mismatch. Someone else isn't on the same page as me, and then you have information the other person doesn't. So I've been trying to work a lot in the last 3 months or so on how do you put together those right communication pathways so that somebody can have that responsibility to lead a particular area, and that I wouldn't be able to do a better job because I've kind of passed along all the right signals that things are working, not working, or going to that person, not to me. And it's much easier said than done. I feel like, especially in a remote company, is you don't always get like a clear, immediate signal that something's not working. It may take a couple days or weeks for it to kind of rear its head, and you realize you have to go back and retool something.
Mhm. If you're giving advice to somebody who works as a software engineer but doesn't have that AI background, because what I was trying to get to with the previous question was if you have somebody who's has technical capabilities and they're interested in starting an AI company and they're trying to understand how much do I have to learn about this in order to actually have an AI company? Because I feel like as engineers, we might want to go into the deep end and understand there's probabilities, statistics, a lot of math that goes into that. But that is a humongous learning curve that, as you said, it'll be hard to, if you're trying to build a company, you're better off working with people who dedicate their careers to that, but understanding enough that you can make decisions, have conversations about it, etc. So how much do you think, or what do you think specifically an engineer would need to learn if they want to pursue and starting an AI company, but they don't necessarily have that background of having a PhD in artificial intelligence?
Sure. Well, it's two completely different workflows if you are creating an AI model and if you're doing inference or using an AI model. And I think
Mhm.
you hit the nail on the head earlier when you mentioned you need to speak the language. It has never been easier to learn to speak the language of AI. There are tools that exist that I wish existed when we were starting the company. So I would recommend go to a bunch of different places you can go. You can go to Google's Media Pipe framework. They've got a bunch of open source models, and just set aside for the moment creating a model. Learn how
Mhm.
these models work. There are three types in vision. There's object classification, which will give a label. If I hold up a photo, what is this? That was that initial ImageNet competition. Then there's detection, which doesn't just classify what it is, it draws a bounding box and says where in the image is it. And then there's segmentation, where if you think about background blurring, where you're detecting what is person, what is not, where each pixel gets a label. It's not just drawing a box. So there are these different terms that I think if you don't understand those terms, it's going to be relatively hard to start an AI company. But we're software engineers, right? Like you can read API docs, you can pull down open
Yeah.
source packages. So if you just start there, go to some open source, go to Hugging Face, you can pull down different models, you can try things out, get familiar with the vocabulary. And I generally try to avoid training models when I can because it's really expensive. We have a server running on Google Cloud now, and it costs $30,000 a month to run for a
Oh,
single
wow.
server just for training. And the
Yeah.
project we're doing will probably take a few months. And you don't even know if it's going to succeed. So that's like the bet you got to take for running an AI company. So if
Yeah.
there is a way to solve something, if you want to do a face detector or something that's like more commonly used, I would recommend just go grab the open source model and try it out, see if it works. If it can prevent you from having to rack up a 5, 6, 7 figure cloud bill, then go for it. Um, but I think at the end of the day, having familiarity with the vocabulary and just learning the terminology is a good start. And then you can kind of go deeper as you need to when you're trying to deploy something. So, for instance, if you play around with Google's Media Pipe framework, they have a face detector. And if you're building a use case where you want to do filters in the video chat or count people like walking on and off a certain area, you could use this model to do that thing. But there are limitations with it. It's called a selfie segmenter, and it was trained on selfies. So if you try to use it on the rear camera and not the front camera, it can only see like so far away, a couple feet or so. So if someone's 10, 15 feet away, they might not get detected. So you start learning about those kinds of like subtle implementation details where on the surface, hey, it's a person detector, it should work in all cases. And then you start learning about sampling biases and all these kinds of things. But there are just so many models that are out there today. So I would encourage you to just go get started, pull one down, try it out if you have an idea. Um, don't focus on training until you have a problem that you've convinced yourself really needs training, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do that's maybe 80% good enough to deploy. And if you're just doing it for education, that's fine. Go start with that.
So get your hands dirty and just experiment with the tools out there.
Mm-hmm.
So before our call, we talked about agentic AI briefly. Do you mind explaining to the audience what agentic AI is and how that will create opportunities versus replacing people?
Sure. So agentic AI is an area that I'm personally really excited about. And think of it as AI that can use tools. It means a lot of different things, but I'd say that's like the most important facet that I would focus on. And if you think about ChatGPT, if you want to go write an email, you usually have to copy over your context or give it the details. Like it starts off as a blank chat and you have to go tell it all the context. Then it writes the email, you go back and forth, and then you copy paste it back into your email client, hit send. But what agentic AI can do is the AI can learn to use the tool for you. So I think this is what really gets mass adoption is what if you didn't have to stop and think, oh, let me use AI for that, and then switch out from what I'm doing to something else. If you are on a phone call and an AI agent is reminding you the standard operating procedures while you're on the phone call, you don't have to hang up. Just while you're in the dialer app, it's telling you these things. While you're writing the email, if it's popping up in there and giving you the tips, if you can tell it an outcome and say, hey, here's what I'd like to get, and the tool can go and do the work for you and report back. This idea of the AI being an agent that works on your behalf, I think is really empowering to a lot of different employees. Just for fun, I think I haven't even told you this yet, but just for fun, I made an open source AI agent in the holiday. I just wanted to like learn more about it, see how it all works. So I learned by doing, so I went ahead and did something. But I don't know if you've ever had this problem. Maybe you do when you're looking for guests to have on your show. But if you have to go and do some research, and let's imagine you need to go and figure out, hey, who are all the potential guests who could come onto this show? So this tool that I've open sourced is called Scourhead because it scours the web. So you can go to scourhead.com or it's on GitHub as well. And what it does is it will scour the web for you. So step one, you explain the context. You say, hey, I'm Marcus. I have a podcast. I'm looking for some guests. And then it uses Llama, an open source from Meta, a large language model, and it will brainstorm search queries for you and say, if that's what you're looking for, here are 10 ideas. Then you click the next button, it'll go and actually do those searches. And then you could tell it the headings you would like in your spreadsheet around guest name, link to video, like whatever you're looking for. And that agent will go and scour the web, take all those results back, run it through the language model, structure it in that format that you give, and then give you a spreadsheet at the end of all the results. So that workflow that it's going through is exactly the same workflow that you or I would do as a human. It's doing Google searches, clicking links, looking at the pages, noting the data down, but it's doing it on your behalf where you told it the outcome. You still have control along the way. You can change the queries if you want. But the basic idea is that you can give this agent a task, go to bed. And I think the part that I found pretty exciting about it is when I finish the work for the day, I usually shut the lid to my laptop and that compute is sitting there doing nothing. But if you leave your laptop open because you've got these agents doing things, now you can be making more progress while you're going on in your day. So it's a really bare bones app. The UI could use a lot of improvement. It's not the best thing in the world, but it gets the job done. I challenged myself to 1 week end to end between family commitments, and then it was working at the end. So I put it up on Hacker News, and now people started downloading it, using it, all that fun stuff. But the idea is the software takes a goal, high level business goal, just like you tell me as a person, you tell the tool, and then it goes and it uses tools that you or I would use, search engines, browsers, and it builds something for you that would look a lot like using a research assistant, but it's all just AI.
That's awesome. I love that use case. Actually, it's funny you mentioned that. So for the podcast guests, I was leveraging a tool called Perplexity.
Okay. Yep.
So what I would do is I would scrape podcast guests from other podcasts, and I would use Perplexity to help me find out, or it actually, I would get the descriptions. I would parse the names and the company name of the
Mm-hmm.
description, and Perplexity would search the web. It would give me the URL back for the company name based on the description that was there.
Yep.
And I would be able to use that information to run through a tool to help find email addresses. And I built the automation in Make. So it's
Okay.
one of the things that was super cool about it, because I was having trouble at the beginning of the show finding guests, and then using AI and this automation, it was able to do that. But I love that idea of searching the internet and doing that, because it wasn't something I was using with ChatGPT before, and then stumbled on Perplexity, which focuses on
Right,
that
on search.
specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the biggest problem I was facing is search is a solved problem. There's a lot of search engines that'll search for you, but then getting the responses back, like if you're planning a trip or something and hey, what are 50 things I can do in Venice?
Yeah,
Like the structuring that and being like, I don't know, maybe I'm just an engineer, but I think in spreadsheets, it's like, here are the 3 columns that I'd like, and can you go fill it back in and tell me when everything's done? That workflow is something that I spend a lot of time if I'm trying to do some research on, like reading the pages, coming up with that information, and then just kind of had like a light bulb moment, like, wait, large language models do this kind of stuff all day, every day. Let's try it out, see how it goes.
well, that's awesome. I'll make sure to check that out. So, Zach, we're going to start wrapping up now. And I have a few quick questions I'd like to ask you before we
Sure.
wrap up. So this is a big one. So it'll be hard to condense the question, but we'll try it here. Where do you see AI going in the future, and what are you most excited about with AI going forward?
Okay, this might be a little counterintuitive. I'm excited for people to stop talking about AI. And I think if people stop talking about AI, what that means is it got so embedded in the fabric of the actual tool. We talked about the workflow before,
Yeah,
that the AI isn't really the new shiny thing. It's just the process becomes easier, the process becomes faster, and that people feel like they can just get things done faster. That I feel like right now, because everything's so early, there's this temptation to speak a lot about how it's made. But if we can get back to where we were before, where, hey, I've got this process that I'd like to get done. I'd like it to be done as fast as possible. I'd like it to be done as accurately as possible. Whatever it is your goals are, I think the AI can help you get there. But I don't really think it deserves the center of attention. It's more the customer journeys, the customer stories. That's really where the limelight ought to be. So if we stop talking about it, I think that means that AI has actually become mature.
yeah, that makes sense. It just becomes a tool that we utilize, but instead of having the headline there, it's we can
Yeah, I
leverage
mean,
it
like
to solve this problem. Yeah.
how much do we chat about our laptop or whether we're on LTE or Wi-Fi or Ethernet? Like, there's a lot of technology just by virtue of me seeing your face right now that
Yeah.
we've just kind of taken for granted, and I feel like that's really where things become um, incumbent. And I think we're getting there with AI, but we're not quite there yet.
I was talking to my grandpa yesterday. He's 92 years old, and he moved from Trinidad and Tobago to Canada in the 50s. And he was telling me when he wanted to send a Christmas message to his family back in Trinidad, he would have to send a telegram in November.
And
So it would,
that's not the app Telegram, right? That's the real Telegram.
that's the real telegrams way back in November. And I didn't understand it at first. I had to ask him a few times to clarify. And it's just crazy to see in one lifetime as well how far the technology has gone.
Yeah, for sure.
So, if you had one piece of advice to your younger self, what would that be?
Put yourself in the uncomfortable spot. I think I learned the most talking to customers. Um, I mean, there's a lot of like advice you can read on the internet about how to learn from a customer, but getting a cancellation email from a customer, it's like not the best way to get the feedback, but there's like good feedback and where expectations weren't met there. So I would say don't shy away from those kinds of uncomfortable situations. And the whole world is kind of being rewritten now. So it's not like there's one person that has everything figured out. Like, you have context, you know what you're doing, you've got business goals you're trying to achieve. And if you go in there and try to figure it out, like, trust your problem solving skills more than this holding yourself back on things that you've just done before in the past.
Awesome. And where can people find you online if they want to connect with you and learn more about you and Yembo?
Sure. I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you look up Zach Rattner on LinkedIn, feel free to shoot me a note if there's something I said you have questions about, disagree with. If you want to get started with AI, you're looking for some pointers. I try to be helpful. So feel free to shoot me a DM, add a connection, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I will say I read your book, Grow Up Fast: Lessons from an AI Startup, and I found that very insightful to get firsthand experience from somebody who has started an AI startup in this day and age. Because we can't go back and read a book 30 years ago about an AI startup. It's happening right
Exactly.
now.
It's
So
happening now. Yeah.
that was awesome. Zach, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Marcus, thanks for having me. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.